In a world where every action leaves a mark, the tale of a thief reveals a chilling truth. No one escapes the chains forged by their own deeds. Welcome to Echoing Tales, where the choices we make echo through time and fate always demands its due. Today's story, Chains of Consequence, will make you question: are we ever truly free from the weight of our past? Bantu was a man who lived in the shadows. Thin and lanky, his shabby clothes made him look like a wanderer, but his sharp, piercing eyes always stood out. Those eyes weren't just sharp, they showed intelligence, a calculating mind, and a hint of something darker. Though he didn't look strong, his lean frame gave him surprising agility. Among the underworld, his name was well known, but nobody really knew much about him. Crooks admired his cleverness but didn't trust him, and the police had heard of his crimes but could never catch him. Bantu was a mystery. Wherever he went, he learned the local dialect so quickly that it felt like he had grown up there. He could blend into any city, becoming part of it until he disappeared, leaving behind only confusion. Bantu had a method to his life of crime. He would arrive in a new town and first visit all the shady places, tea stalls where suspicious men gathered, gambling dens, or the back alleys known for their criminal activities. There he would spot people like him, thieves, tricksters, and small-time crooks. Slowly, he would form a gang pretending to work with them. Once the gang was ready, they would plan a robbery together. Bantu always targeted wealthy homes or businesses. The plan would go smoothly, but as soon as the job was done and the loot was in hand, Bantu would show his true colors. He would double-cross his gang, take the best share for himself, and leave them to face the consequences. Sometimes, he even tipped off the police about his own team just to ensure his escape. The moment Bantu felt that the police were closing in or that his name had become too well known in the city, he would pack up and vanish overnight, moving on to his next target. This is how Bantu lived, and this is how he ended up in a small city in Madhya Pradesh. Little did he know, this city would not let him slip away so easily. True to form, he quickly sought out the city's shadowy corners, assembling a gang of misfits hungry for quick riches. Their eyes soon locked on a prime target, a young businessman whose meteoric rise had made him the pride of the town. Smart, hardworking, and successful, the businessman's honest journey to wealth infuriated Bantu. "Why break your back?" he sneered. "When one smart move can get you everything in one night." The target's home was a fortress of comfort. A sprawling house with his wife, toddler, live-in maid, driver, and a single security guard. The businessman's predictable schedule and an upcoming family trip presented the gang with the perfect window. Bantu's gang studied the house meticulously. They noticed the guard's tendency to nod off at night, especially when his employers were away. One of them, a newspaper vendor, began chatting with the guard daily, slipping in questions under the guise of small talk. Bit by bit, he pieced together key details about the alarm system and the weak points in the house's layout. One afternoon, knowing the security guard was glued to a cricket match, the vendor slipped into the house under the guise of delivering a free magazine. Pretending to be interested in helping the maid with something, he discreetly disabled the cameras and left without raising suspicion. With everything in place, Bantu and his gang moved that night. It was a moonless, quiet evening, and the family had already left for their trip. The gang approached the house like shadows, confident in their plan. As expected, the security guard was sound asleep in his chair outside. They bypassed him with ease and crept into the house, ready to execute their heist. It was going to be another flawless job, or so Bantu thought. The gang worked quietly, moving like shadows through the house. They knew every step, every turn, and avoided making the slightest noise. They quickly gathered jewelry, cash, and other valuables, slipping them into their bags with practiced precision. The plan was running perfectly, and soon they were ready to leave. But as Bantu passed through the master bedroom, his sharp eyes caught something, a faint glimmer near the edge of a painting on the wall. He paused for a moment, curiosity tugging at him, and moved closer. Peeling back the frame, he found a hidden locker concealed behind it. His heart raced. Whatever was inside had to be more valuable than everything they had taken so far. For a moment, he considered opening it right then, but the gang was waiting, and the risk of being caught was too high. Being the crooked man he was, Bantu said nothing to his accomplices. He quietly memorized the details and left with the gang as planned. They all exited the house as silently as they had entered, bags full of loot. While the others celebrated their haul, Bantu's mind was elsewhere. He didn't care about the jewelry or cash they had taken. His thoughts were fixed on what might be inside that hidden locker. He decided then and there he would return alone to claim the real treasure for himself. If you're captivated by the story so far and want to hear more spine-chilling tales, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Your support means the world to us and keeps us inspired to bring you even more mysterious and thrilling narratives. Now, let's dive back into the story. An hour after the heist, Bantu crept back into the house. He found himself in the bedroom once more, drawn to the painting that concealed the locker. As he worked to pry it open, his gaze fell on a family portrait hanging on the wall. A young couple smiled warmly at the camera, their happiness almost radiating from the frame. Standing beside them were an older couple, their expressions protective yet content. But it wasn't the young couple that held Bantu's attention. It was the older couple. His breath caught and his mind raced. Something about their faces churned up memories buried deep within him. Fights, arguments, the suffocating walls of a worn-out house. Everything came rushing back. It was 20 years ago, and Bantu had been 15. He returned home one evening in a sorry state, his clothes torn, his face bruised, dragging a terrified 7-year-old boy with him. He was yelling at the boy, scolding and smacking him as he stumbled through the door. Their house, an old crumbling structure, offered no comfort, just as his life had offered no peace. His parents rushed out, startled by the commotion. They immediately pulled the boy away from him and scolded Bantu sharply. "What have you done this time?" His father's voice was weary, laced with frustration. Bantu didn't answer at first, his face dark with anger. This wasn't the first time he had caused trouble. From the time he was little, his parents had noticed that something was different about him. He always wanted things they couldn't afford, and if he didn't get them, he found ways to take them. At first, they tried to guide him with love, but it didn't work. Then came the scolding, the reprimands, but that only hardened him. By the time he was a teenager, Bantu had grown stubborn and defiant. He had even raised his hand against his father during an argument. The village had turned its back on the family because of him, labeling him a thief and a disgrace. His parents were isolated, worn out, and ashamed. That day, as his mother tried to console the young boy, his father demanded an explanation. "Why were you beating him? What did he do?" "Don't call him my brother," Bantu spat. "He tattled on me, told those people I was stealing, and I got caught. They beat me because of him." Grabbing a stick from the corner, Bantu moved to hit the boy again, but his father intervened. He snatched the stick away, his patience finally snapping. "Enough! We have had enough of you, Bantu. If you can't change, then leave this house." Go! We'll think we only have one son from now on. Bantu's anger flared. You think you have one son? Well, you're right, you do have only one son, he shouted, his voice thick with resentment. And you will see that once I'm gone. I'll leave and I'll never come back. Don't ever expect to see me again. His words hung in the air, leaving his parents stunned, unable to decipher the layers of meaning in his declaration. Bantu walked out that day, leaving behind his family and the life they had tried to build for him. He never regretted it. Over the years, he had blocked them out completely, never sparing a thought for whether they were alive or dead. But now, standing in this grand house, staring at the photograph, all those memories came flooding back. His chest tightened as he took in the image. The older couple looked content, well-dressed and proud. They appeared to have everything they could ever want without him. His gaze shifted to the young man in the photo, the so-called brother. Jealousy twisted inside Bantu, sharp and bitter, like a knife turning in his chest. His parents had built a happy life without him, while he had clawed his way through the shadows, surviving by conning and stealing. They had thrived, and he had been forgotten. His anger bubbled up raw and uncontrollable, fueled by the realization that they had erased him as though he had never existed. His eyes darted to the locker. A new thought took hold, born of his jealousy and rage. If he couldn't have their happiness, he would destroy it. He would empty the locker, take whatever treasure they had hidden, and leave nothing behind. Then, he would burn the house down, wiping away every trace of their perfect life. As he crouched by the locker, working furiously to figure out the mechanism, a sharp alarm suddenly pierced the silence. Bantu froze, his hands trembling as panic set in. His anger turned to fear, but the damage was done. The sudden commotion woke the sleepy security guard, who stumbled out of his quarters, yelling. Lights flickered on in the neighboring houses, and distant shouts grew louder. Without hesitation, Bantu bolted, vaulting over the boundary wall. His foot slipped on the edge, and he scraped his leg on a jagged stone, pain shooting up his thigh. He landed awkwardly, but recovered quickly, adrenaline numbing the sting as he ran. Voices grew closer behind him, and then he heard it. A police siren wailing in the distance. Panic surged. Someone must have alerted the police, and to his dismay, a patrol van happened to be nearby. Bantu sprinted through the narrow lanes, dodging startled residents who peeked out of their homes. His breath came in ragged gasps as the pain in his leg worsened with every step. Think! Think! His mind raced, desperate for a way out. A hiding spot. He needed somewhere to vanish. Then it came to him. The crumbling house at the end of the lane. While scoping out the neighborhood earlier, he and his gang had dismissed it as irrelevant. It was in a sorry state, with peeling plaster, broken tiles and windows covered in thick grime. No lights had ever been seen inside, and the house looked long abandoned. It was his only chance. Bantu veered sharply toward the house, stumbling slightly as he reached the boundary wall. He winced, clutching his injured leg, but managed to scale the low, moss-covered wall. Crouching behind a dense thicket of shrubs, he waited for the police van and pursuing voices to pass. Holding his breath, he pressed himself against the damp, crumbling wall, praying they wouldn't see him. The voices grew fainter, and the police van sped past, siren blaring. Seizing the moment, Bantu moved toward the house. Its facade was a haunting sight in the moonlight. A collapsing roof, broken shutters hanging precariously, and cracked spiderwebbing across the walls. One of the windows was slightly ajar, the wooden frame warped from years of neglect. With a grimace, Bantu hoisted himself up and slipped inside, landing in a dusty, dimly lit room. The air was heavy with the smell of mildew, and the floor creaked beneath his weight. The room was bare, save for a rickety wooden chair and cobwebs draped across every corner. The walls were streaked with water stains, and the ceilings threatened to cave in at any moment. Exhausted and aching, Bantu lay on the cold, hard floor and decided to wait out the night. Despite the throbbing pain in his injured leg, his exhaustion soon overpowered his fear and he drifted into a restless sleep. When he woke, the dull ache in his leg had been replaced by something sharper. Groaning, he opened his eyes and froze. His legs were shackled, thick iron chains binding him to something heavy in the next room. A jolt of panic surged through him as he tried to move. The chains clinked ominously, their cold weight a terrifying reminder that he was trapped. He strained against the shackles, his fingers fumbling to pry them open, but it was futile. The rusted metal was too strong. Anxiety gripped him as he tried to listen for any sounds. Was someone else in the house? The faint shuffle of footsteps answered his question. His heart pounded as he turned his head towards the source of the noise. The door to the next room creaked open, and a hulking figure stepped into the dim light. Bantu's breath hitched. The man was massive, broad-shouldered and towering, his disheveled appearance making him even more menacing. His long matted hair fell in tangles, and his beard was wild and unkempt, streaked with grey. His clothes hung loosely, tattered and stained, as though he hadn't cared for himself in years. Before Bantu could react, the man rushed toward him with surprising speed. Bantu tried to back away, but the chains yanked him to a stop. The giant man dropped his knees and enveloped him in a crushing hug, his immense arms locking Bantu in place. Bantu squirmed, his arms spined, but the man's grip was ironclad. "You have come back," the man said, his voice trembling, a strange mix of joy and desperation. "I knew you would. My son has returned." Bantu's mind raced. The man's face was familiar even through the layers of crime and the years that had passed. And then it hit him. He knew exactly who this man was. Recognition flooded his thoughts like a thunderbolt, and a chill ran down his spine. Years ago, on a bustling train platform, a towering man had left a crying child alone, perched on a trunk, with a curt promise to return. Bantu, just a boy himself, had watched from the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to steal. But instead of merely taking the trunk, he had taken the child, silencing his cries with whispered promises of sweets and safety. The boy had become part of Bantu's life, raised as his brother, an unspoken reminder of a crime that haunted the family's conscience. But that child, now a successful businessman, had unknowingly claimed the life Bantu had always believed should have been his. And this man, this broken shell of a father, was the one who had lost everything in the process. Bantu's breath caught in his throat as the man tightened his grip. "I won't lose you again," he said, his voice filled with anguish. "This time you'll stay with me." Bantu's blood ran cold. He tried to explain, but the man's delusions drowned out his words. The man had become a recluse after losing his son. Grief and guilt had consumed him, spiraling into madness. He had never been a loving father. In fact, he had blamed his son for his wife's death during childbirth. The boy had been a constant reminder of his loss, a source of resentment. Yet, when the boy disappeared, so did the last thread of the man's sanity. For years he wandered, calling every boy he saw his son. Slowly, he withdrew from the world, retreating into this crumbling house. His mind twisted reality. clinging to the hope that his son would one day return. Fate had brought them both here, not through coincidence, but through karmic design. The life Bantu had stolen had flourished, while his own spiraled into despair. Now, he was trapped, shackled not only by the chains, but by the consequences of his past. As days turned into weeks, Bantu began to grasp the horrifying truth. He was now living the life of the boy he had stolen so many years ago. That boy, now grown, had taken the life Bantu always thought he deserved: a family, a home, and love. Bantu, in turn, was trapped in the fate he had set into motion with his own hands. The universe, with its silent, inexorable justice, had balanced the scales. The life he coveted was never his to claim, and the chains he wore now were forged by his own hands. This is an original work of fiction created by Echoing Tales, a brand new channel blending suspense and mystery. Join us as we unravel a story shrouded in eerie echoes and spine-chilling twists every week. As we're just starting out, we need your support. So don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like the video, and hit the bell icon to help us keep creating more captivating stories. Until we meet again in the next tale, stay vigilant, and before you sleep tonight, remember to take one last look into the darkness.